Welcome to Town Square Celebration. I'm Eleanor Burns. I grew up in the small town of Zelienople in western Pennsylvania, and that's just north of Pittsburgh. Well, I've stitched together such fond memories of that town. There's patches of my family, my friends, and teachers from school and church. Now their influence is just woven through my life. So to pay tribute to my pieces from the past, I've created a new quilt, the Town Square Sampler. I have 4 to show you, and each one is in a different season. And summer and the 4th of July is my favorite time of the year, especially since my birthday is July 3rd. It's the season to celebrate with patriotic red, white, and blue. Now the whole town looks like it's getting ready for a parade. Mary Hawkins made this festive Town Square sampler, and I especially like how she made the flower garden across the bottom of the quilt. Well, doesn't it just make you think of swimming in the park and fireworks at night? Well, how quickly summer turns into fall when the evenings are crisp and the leaves change colors. This one looks like back to school with its beige fabric for the sky and then green for the ground. Well, we'll build the quilt in rows with a different technique in each row. You know, the rows go so quickly, you'll never get bored. Well, in a small town, it's easy to make lifelong friends. So the top row is the stars of friendship. Well, the points are easy to sew, and then we'll just square them up with this great ruler. And the next row is the 4-patch with 2.5-inch strips. I'll just show you how to get those perfect matches. Guardian angels always seem to protect me, so this quilt had to have applique angels. It's time for townsfolk to give thanks, rejoice over a plentiful harvest, and then we'll bring our memories to life with a trip down our quilted Main Street. I'll show you how to build the blocks and the trees, and you can even personalize the street with your own fussy cut people. Well, all of the top rows were sewn with the sky or the beige as the background, but now we'll just jump the line into the ground fabric or the green as the background. We'll move on to Edna's Pinwheel with 1.5-inch strips. Now this row is for my great Aunt Edna. And then the maple leaf row is from the triangle piece squares, and I'll just make them a walk in the park for you. And in the last row, we'll visit the farm with ducks and ducklings and a new technique of putting those patches together. And the whole town is safely kept intact with this split rail border made out of your favorite 3 fabrics. Well, Teresa made this quilt, and it's perfect for hanging over the Thanksgiving holidays. Well, fall turns into winter, and a quiet hush falls over the town and blankets it in snow. Ooh, snowy white background fabric for the ground, just freezing Edna's pinwheel and the maple leaves and the ducks. You can see how each piece of fabric contrasts with the snow. And then the sky has small twinkling silver stars over it. The stars shine brightly over the angels, protecting the town, certainly a cause for celebration. And then on Main Street, the church reminds me of my own St. Paul's and the little cottage I was born in and my Main Street Elementary School. As night follows day, spring follows winter. The colors in this quilt are brighter, and they create a cheery feeling about the town. Well, my cousin Carol Ann quilted this town square, and she said, "The sky is awesome," and she's right. Well, the stars and the angels stand out beautifully. My sister Patty did the piecing, and she did it her fussy way with little curtains in the cottage windows, and then there's a little gold doorknob here, fussy cut flowers. She even appliqued the trees, and she has cute little girls popping their heads out of their school windows. So let's see if we can create some hometown memories. Now that you've seen all of the quilts, You'll need to select which season you want to make. Once that's decided, select your sky and your ground. Your sky is your largest piece at 3 yards. Your ground needs to have 2 yards. And then go on. Just lay those out in big pieces so you can see what you're working with. Take 3 of your favorite fabrics and stack them up for your split rail fence. That's going to go right around the border. You need to have a dark medium, a light medium, and a dark. And you know, each one of these pieces need 1.5 yards. And after that, this quilt is perfect for all of the fabriholics because they're nearly all 1/4 yard pieces. So we're just going to addition our 1/4 yard pieces and see how they work. Let's start at the bottom with ducks and ducklings. Now it's a large triangle, so you can go with a large scale print. Check the contrast. Looks great. And then just build your way up onto the maple leaf. Now for the summer, which I'm laying out, you might want to go ahead and just use green. But remember, for fall, rust fabrics would be perfect in there. But lay those out, and then Edna's pinwheel. It could look like a little picket fence around that main street. So if you go for a light like this one, it'll look perfect. Now, Main Street is just going to take tons of different pieces of fabric. We're going to get into our architectural pieces. So let's start out with the church. The church could be stone, like my church when I was growing up. Pick out one of your stone favorites, and then decide on a piece that'll work great as the stained glass window. Now, trees. Got to have trees in our town. At least 2 different greens, and remember to get a brown for the trunk. Something like that's perfect. Now the cottage and the school could be checked or brick, whatever you'd really like. Oh, I've got a great selection here. Some check would be really cute, some different colors of brick. Just make sure they contrast with your sky fabric. Just lay them out, lay them on top and check. How about some roofs? Now there are some neat pieces of fabric for your roof. This one might look good, kind of looks like a thatched roof, or we could have a slate roof on the buildings, or maybe something like this, good texture in it. And then think about doors. We've got to have doors to get in those buildings. This is a good piece of wood right there. And if you'd like to put children in the windows or adults, look for a fussy cut piece of fabric, something that has some people in it, and line those up. Well, that looks like a great town, one you'd like to visit. Let's go on to the angel row now. Now the angel dress could be a dark color like this, and pick out a light for her wing and her banner. And you can pull fabrics, maybe one of the fabrics down here for her hair or her halo. That'll work out fine. We've got Edna's pinwheel right up here. Or actually it's 4-patch. We have 4-patch right up here, and the last 2 pieces are going to be your star, a medium and a dark yellow, and that's going to just top off that whole town. Well, I already decided I'm going to work on my spring quilt, so let's get busy. We're going to start our sewing on the easiest row of all, the 4-patch row. There's 16 4-patches that make up this row. Now when you think of 4-patch, perhaps it's symbolic of those 4 roads that come together in the center of town, or north, south, east, and west. But to me, the 4-patch stands for the 4 little Nagel girls of Zillionople. Well, I found this great picture of my grandmother with my sisters and I. We're playing with balloons, and I think it's because we're celebrating the arrival of my dad's new trucks. Well, you can tell he's pretty proud of those trucks just by looking at him sitting there. You know, he ran his business in Zillionople for over 50 years, an important part in the community. Well, when you're making your 4-patch, you need to have 1/4 yard of medium and then pair it up with the sky. Well, I just cut off a small piece of the sky so I could work with it. I tore them from the bolt, so they're on the straight of the grain. But you want to just take that 1/4 inch line on your 6 by 24 inch, just line it up so you can trim off that torn, bruised edge and get rid of it. The strips are 2.5 inches wide, so just line up the 6 by 24 with 2.5 right at the edge of the cut, and then layer cut 2 sets so that you have 2 of each one of them, 2.5 inches wide. Well, I already have one set that I cut in half. I just want to show you how to sew them together with that perfect 1/4 inch seam. Now that is the challenge, but I'm lucky enough to have this 1/4 inch foot on my sewing machine that just works so well, because when I put the fabric right up against the bar, it makes it a perfect 1/4 inch. And there are actually 15 needle positions that I could go ahead and move my needle to either the left or the right to get that 1/4. But just in case you don't have something like that, you might want to go ahead and cut 1.5 inch strips. Cut them into 6 inch lengths and then sew them together with what you think is a perfect 1/4 inch. And then when you press those 3 strips, they should measure 3.5 inches wide. So take the 1/4 inch test before you start on the quilt, because oh my gosh, you want this quilt to go together. I like to press my strips on a gridded pressing mat because, ooh, I hate those bowed strips. So just place your strip so that it's on the line. Put the darkest color right on top. Just set the seam. I love steam. And then once you've set the seam, just lift it up and press right into it so you don't have any little wrinkles or tucks. There's nothing worse than mismatched four-patch. Okay, then just take those strips, and I like to use the grid on my cutting mat for everything. So I'm just going to line up the strips right on the cutting mat. I'm going to check my 1/4 inch seam, and we'll see how I did. When these 2 strips are sewn together, they should be 4.5 inches. So check it before you go on. Okay, I'm going to put the medium on the bottom, sky at the top, and then take a second strip or just a half strip like I have, place it right sides together to it, and you want to lock those seams in place. So if you just take your fingers, run them along there, you should be able to get a pretty good match. Okay, over on the left edge, oh my gosh, I'm just going to get rid of that selvage edge. So just square it off, get rid of that, and then with the 6 by 6, line it up so you can cut 2.5 inch sections. Now if you're actually cutting away from your sewing area, you might want to cut your 16 pairs and then just stack them on your ruler so you can carry them over to your machine. So let's see how good these matches are. So once again, take that perfect seam and perfect 1/4 inch, and the way the seams are lined up, the seam on the top is going to go up away from you. You might want to hold it flat with your stiletto as you stitch over it, and it actually locks into the one that's underneath. So just pick up the second pair, feed it right through, and you want to just, oh, if you want to do a little peek right here, make sure, feel it, and just keep that flat. So you want to assembly line all 16 pairs right through one after the other. So let me just do one more pair. We'll do one more pressing, and then I'll show you how you make those seams lock. Okay, once you have your stitches in, take them and place them on the mat so that the stitches are across the top. And set the seam, and then just lift and press right into it. Oh my gosh, if you could see that match, are they good? All right, so I'm just going to take these and clip them apart so that they're in exactly the same order. Just as I sew them, I'm just going to stack them up and then divide them into 2 piles of 8. Well, that makes sense, 2 piles of 8, 8 and 8 or 16. That's so that we can go ahead and set up locking stitches on the next pairs. We're going to sew these into pairs. So if you turn them so that the pieces on the right, the seams are going up, and then the pieces on the left, the seams are going down. So that when you just flip these pieces right sides together, you can assembly line sew pairs with locking seams right here. You can see how that's just going to lock together, and that'll go right along for all 16 blocks. So get your 16 4-patch sewn together and we'll go on to the next easy row. Now our second row also comes from strips, and it's this one called Edna's Pinwheel. Now it's in the ground, so whenever you select your 1/4 yard piece, you need to make sure that there's a great contrast between the two pieces of fabric. This is the block itself. There's 16 of them in the row, and this row is actually separated from the sky with a 3-inch strip. Well, when I think of Edna's Pinwheel, I always think about my great Aunt Edna, definitely my favorite aunt. Now this is her photo. She and her fur, with her son Wilbur. And to the right are my great-grandparents, the Scheidementals. To the left are my grandparents, the Drischels. Well, my great Aunt Edna told me how my mother courted my father, the boy next door. Well, she'd just come on over to Aunt Edna's house, sit on that fence, just look so good. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty sassy photo for the 1930s. Well, we're using strips that are 1½ inches wide. You need to have 5 ground strips, 1½ inches wide, and 5 medium strips also. So just take those 2 strips, sew them up with that 1/4 inch seam, and then press that seam to the darkest piece. Now, just as we did in the 4-patch, you've got to check your measurements. Oh, how about, let's just take the ruler, because when you measure these 2 sewn together strips, they should measure 2½ inches. So if you do that each step of the way, you'll make sure it all fits together. So square that left end off, and I have some pieces layered up. Actually, there's 2 here. So you're going to take and cut these 2 strips into 2½ inch sections. Out of those 5 strips, you should get a total of 64 of them. Now, once you have all 64 cut, make a stack of blocks just by turning them like this. Take them and do concentrate on what is your medium fabric, because the medium gets turned into that center point and your ground is on the outside edges. So just 4 of them. It's pretty amazing what you can do just with strips, isn't it? Okay, so once you have a stack, you might as well put all that you need, 16 in each one of these 4 stacks, so that you can just take the top block on the right, flip it onto the left, take the top block here, flip it over, and then just start assembly line sewing. Let me see if I can get these lined up like this. Okay, and grab your stiletto. Use it to help match the outside edges and just push it through. And then the next piece, you can always tell which pair to use because it's the one that's on the top and the piece will be wrong side up. So then just assembly line sew this piece right behind it, and you'll be assembly line sewing a total of 16 of the blocks, and then clip it apart every 2 so it's almost in pairs like this. Then open these pieces up, check and make sure you've got that pinwheel right in the center, and then just flip it right sides together. And just as we did in the 4-patch, let's just take these seams and just make them go in opposite directions. We can wiggle them right here in the middle, opposite directions. And then when you start sewing, hold on to those threads because the machine would just love to eat those corners of fabric. Hold the top seam down with your stiletto, and then the bottom seam will just naturally fall into place. Okay, so you're just going to assembly line sew all 16 of them, one after the other, and then just place the block with the stitching across the top, set that seam, and then just open and press right into it. Well, believe it or not, the 4-patch and Edna's Pinwheel are exactly the same, so that whenever you make all the blocks and sew them together into rows, the rows should be identical in length. And you know, actually that sets the pace, the whole length of the rows for the whole town square, so you really want to watch that 1/4 inch seam. Okay, take those pinwheels, make 2 stacks of 8, and remember to turn the seam so that on the left the seams are going down, on the right The seams are going up. You're just going to flip them right sides together, sew them into pairs, and then just take those pairs and sew them into one long strip. So you've got a great start on your rows for the town square. My Aunt Edna helped her husband Earl milk the cows and feed the chickens, and of course, she got her feed in cloth sacks. Well, what a glorious collection of sacks she had, and I was fortunate enough to inherit some. Well, they were all bright prints, large scale, bold. Ooh, I just love them. Now, I actually learned to sew on these feed sacks. In honor of my great Aunt Edna, I created this small wall hanging. It has Aunt Edna's pinwheel right in the center, and then I used the 4-patch around the outside edge. It appears to create a border, and then I finished it off with a sawtooth edge. Now these are all reproduction 1930s. They're cutesy pastel, and my Aunt Edna would say, now Eleanor Ann, you know those are not like my feed sacks. So I selected some fabrics that are more like the traditional sacks, bright colors, large scale prints. I really enjoy working with them. So start with your 4-patch. You need to make 22 of them. Now I use the 2.5-inch pieces. Use half strips so you can get more variety. Actually, I think that it's more interesting using 2 fabrics and then making the 4-patch the same. And then go on to your Aunt Edna's pinwheel. You need to have 20 of the pinwheels, 1.5-inch strips. How about 10 half strips will do you? Now the sawtooth border comes from 4-inch squares. You need to start pressing those first. So turn them so that they're wrong side up. Take and fold them corner to corner on one diagonal. Give them a good press, give them some steam, and then fold them one more time. You need to have 70 squares, all pressed twice. And then whenever you're ready to sew, you sew them into long strips. First in long strips, or you can sew them right to the quilt. Well, think in terms of half of this point right here. From right here, I'm going to just pick up one, lift it up, and insert it so that it's halfway in there. Now you want to use a seam less than 1/4 so the next time you go around you don't see that stitching. Okay, I'm up to there, so lift this one up, insert the next one so that it's halfway there, and just keep on stitching. For the 2 long sides, you need to sew 19 together. For the 2 short sides, 16 together. Well, I'm going to finish these up, then I'll clear the table and show you how to set the whole top together. Place the pinwheels in rows, 4 across and 5 down. Surround the pinwheels with 34.5-inch squares. Place the 22 4-patches next to the 4.5-inch squares. Cut 6 7-inch squares on both diagonals and add them to the sides. Cut 2 3 3/4-inch squares on one diagonal and add them to the 4 corners. Sew the top together, pin the sawtooth to the sides, and then finish with a quick turn. Add some stippling and you will have a charming quilt. I love the way the sawtooth border turned out. It's such a fun quilt. Now the patches from the split rail border are the same as Edna's pinwheel, but they have much wider stripes in them. Now you can set them together on point or in straight rows as this one for a variation. It's just so much fun. Aunt Edna collected many different types of feed sacks. Now she had some printed with ink for embroidered tea towels. It's so much fun. It says hi right here. And then this one is a finished one in a stew. Now you could even have one for each day of the week. Well, she gave me one that could become a pillowcase. It's got the ink printed right on it here, and here's the stitching going along from a flour sack. Well, this one has the funniest picture on it. I laugh every time I see it. It says gold rim, a flour sack. Great fabric. But I think this one is the cutest one of all. It's just a little sailor doll. It's printed on the back of a flour sack. You could just stitch up. But I think the greatest use of her feed sacks was for her large cover-up aprons. Well, my dad told me that she had the thrashers over during harvest, and she really put on a spread. So I can just imagine Aunt Edna cooking up a storm in her feed sack apron. So why don't you get started on your own Town Square sampler and bring back some home memories.
The companion book and video to this program, Town Square Sampler, is available at local fabric stores or order with your credit card. Call 1-800-U2-QUILT. You can also visit our website at www.quiltinaday.com.